Okay. Leave us try this again. Okay, I can hear you now. Cool. So I'm going to third. Are you guilty? How are you two this evening? Okay, what is going on, OSB? There we go. Oh, that's cool. The emotes fall behind my counter. What the hell is going on with my audio tonight? Why do I have an echo? Hold on. OSB updated. Hey, Drift Knight. Okay, none of my audio settings changed. What the hell? Yeah, I'm trying to figure out what's causing it. Oh. It's because I have voice mod. Oh. Hey, Wolfie Pup. Ooh, beef stew sounds good. I had forgotten that I had voice mod, then I've got it set to a different channel. Okay. Wonder how well it's going to work. Thank you. Okay, my voice change is in the queue. I wonder when it's going to go through. I don't know when it would go through or not. I'm figuring out what voice mod does. Hey, Riley. Okay, voice mod's going to be weird. I'm just going to switch back to my normal microphone. I'll mess with the voice mod later on. But turn that off. Okay. I guess I have to have the voice mod program on. Guess it would make sense. Anyway. Need that. Okay, much better. Yeah, I was going to try voice mod, then I forgot I had it turned on. I'm not quite sure what it would sound like if I tried to read stories with the voice mods on or not. But anyway, I was going to say news. If you see it up here on top, I turn off voice mod. That's just weird. My unofficial bookstore is now technically a bookstore. If you look down in my About section, there's one on there that's for Grey Wolf Rare and Magical Books. I actually have a um, storefront for selling books now. That's the address on my banner too. But it's kind of cool. I can actually say that I have a bookstore, and it's really an affiliate one. So I'm just getting commissioned for selling books. But hey, it's always strange when I can go from fictional to reality. And that's kind of what I do anyway. But it's kind of cool. Go check it out. I do have the books that I read on there, and books I'm planning on reading on there. And then I've got some regular books. Like I've got a list of banned books that I've got posted on it. Uh, Other folklore, since my whole thing is, um, well, it's rare and magical books, so I've got books on magic in it and other sorts of things. I thought it was pretty cool. I applied for affiliate on a whim and like got a response in half an hour. They thought it was cool. I was a storyteller, so now I get to plug the stories I tell. And I was going to try to knock out some ads before I really get into anything, just to get them out of the way, because the whole affiliate thing, and I can't completely turn them off and that kind of thing. So let me get that set up. As much as I hate ads interrupting stories. So let me go ahead and get these ads taken care of. If you got a subscription, cool. If not, you don't have to worry about it. And ads triggered anyway. Well, okay. Well, yeah. It's really bad when I noticed that the stories were coming on. Well, the ads were coming on during the stories, so I would stop the story, and I'm recording the stories so I can post them on YouTube anyway. Yeah. I usually don't start the stories until 10 minutes anyway, so I figured if I just ran the ads at the start, it wouldn't mess up anything, and so on and so forth. There it is. Okay. Okay. Get on my monitoring channel so I can know what's going on. And let me go ahead and switch over to a reading screen that I've been using for Sherlock Holmes. And I have the link to the store page down at the bottom now. Go ahead and take that off because I don't want to plug the store right now. I don't want to get into the stories because I've only got 3 more stories left in this book.
We've destroyed an enemy cruiser.
Check something real quick. Okay. Since we're running behind because I was trying to do the whole advertising thing, I guess I'll go ahead and get it started. But my first story for the night, The Greek Interpreter. During my long and intimate acquaintance with Mr. Sherlock Holmes, I had never heard him refer to his relations, and hardly ever to his own early life. This reticence upon his part had increased the somewhat inhuman effect which he produced upon me, until sometimes I found myself regarding him as an isolated phenomenon, a brain without a heart, a deficient in human sympathy as he is preeminent in intelligence. His aversion to women and his disinclination to form any friendships were both typical and his unemotional character, but not more so than his complete suppression of every reference to his own people. I'd come to believe that he was an orphan with no living relatives, but one day, to my very great surprise, he began to talk to me about his brother. It was after tea one summer evening, and the conversation, which had roamed in a desultory, spasmodic fashion from golf clubs to the causes of the change in the obliquity of the ecliptic, came around to the question of atavism and hereditary aptitudes. It's hard to say. The point under discussion was how far any singular gift in an individual was due to his ancestry, and how far to his own early training. In your own case, said I, from all that you have told me, it seems obvious that your faculty of observation and your peculiar facility for deduction are due to your own systematic training. To some extent, he answered thoughtfully. My ancestors were country squires, who appear to have led much the same life as is natural to their class. But none the less, my turn that way is in my veins, and may have come with my grandmother, who was the sister of Venet, a French artist. Art in the blood is liable to take the strangest forms. But how do you know it is hereditary? Because my brother Mycroft possesses it in a larger degree than I do. This was news to me, indeed. If there were another man with such singular powers in England, how was it that neither police nor public had heard of him? I put the question, with a hint that it was my companion's modesty which made him acknowledge his brother as his superior. Holmes laughed at my suggestion. My dear Watson, said he, I cannot agree with those who rank modesty among my virtues. To the logician, all things should be seen equally as they are, and to the underestimates one's self as much as in departure from the truth as to exaggerate one's own powers. When I say, therefore, that Mycroft has better powers of observation than I, you may take it that I am speaking to the exact and the literal truth. Is he your junior? 7 years my senior. How comes it that he is unknown? Oh, he is very well known, in his own circle. Where then? Well, and the Diogenes Club, for example. I had never heard of the institution, and my face must have proclaimed as much, for Sherlock Holmes pulled out his watch. The Diogenes Club is the queerest club in London, and Mycroft one of the queerest men. He's always there from 5:15 to 8:20. It's 6 now, so if you care for a stroll to this beautiful evening, I shall very much be happy to introduce you to your curiosities. 5 minutes later, we were in the street, walking towards Regent's Circus. You wonder, said my companion, why it is that Mycroft does not use his powers for detective work. He is incapable of it. But I thought you said... I said that he is my superior in observation and deduction. And the art of the detective began and ended in reasoning from an armchair. My brother would live to be the greatest criminal agent that ever lived. But he has no ambition and no energy. He will not even go out of his way to verify his own solutions, and would rather be considered wrong than to take the trouble to prove himself right. Again and again I have taken a problem to him, and have received an explanation which has afterwards proved to be the correct one. And yet he is absolutely incapable of working out the practical points which must be gone into before a case could be laid out before a judge or jury. Is it not his profession, then? By no means. What it is to me a means of livelihood is to him the merest hobby of a dilettante. He has an extraordinary facilities for figures and audits of books in some of the government departments. Mycroft lodges in Pall Mall, and he walks around every corner to Whitehall every morning and back every evening. From the year's end to year's end he takes no other exercise, and it is seen nowhere else, except only in the Diogenes room, which is just the opposite of his rooms. I cannot recall the name. Very likely not. There are many men in London, you know, who, some from shyness, some from misanthropy, have no wish for the company of the fellows. Yet they are not adverse to comfortable chairs in the latest periodicals. It is for the convenience of these that the Diogenes Club was started, and it was now considered unsociable and unclubbable men of town. No member is permitted to take the least notice of the other one, save in the strangers' room. No talking is, under any circumstances, allowed, and 3 offences, if brought to the notice of the committee, render the talker liable of expulsion. My brother was one of the founders, and I have found myself a very soothing atmosphere. An introvert social club. Cool. We had reached Pall Mall as we talked, and we were walking down it from the St. James End. Sherlock Holmes stopped at a door a little distance from the Carlton, and, cautioning me not to speak, he led the way into the hall. Through the glass paneling I caught a glimpse of a large and luxurious room in which a considerable number of men were sitting about and reading papers, each in his own little nook. Holmes showed me into a small chamber which looked out into Pall Mall, and then, leaving me for a moment, he came back with a companion whom I knew could only be his brother. Mycroft Holmes was a much larger and stouter man than Sherlock. His body was absolutely corpulent, but his face, though massive, had preserved something of the sharpness of expression which was so remarkable in that of his brother. His eyes, which were a particularly light, watery grey, seemed to always retain that far-away, introspective look which I had only observed in Sherlock Holmes's, when he was exerting his full powers. "I am very glad to meet you, sir," said he, putting out the broad, fat hand like the flipper of a seal. "I hear Sherlock everywhere since you became his chronicler. By the way, Sherlock, I expected to see you around last week to consult me over that Manor House case. I thought you might be a little out of your depth." "No, I solved it," said my friend, smiling. "It was Adams, of course." "Yes, it was Adams." "I was sure of it from the first." The two sat down together in a bow window of the club. To anyone who wishes to study mankind, this is the spot, said Mycroft. Look at the magnificent types. Look at these two men who are coming towards us, for example. The billiard maker and the other? Precisely. What do you make of the other? The two men had stopped opposite the window. Some chalk marks over the waistcoat pocket were the only signs of billiards which I could see in it of them. The other was a very small, dark fellow with his hat pushed back and several packages under his arm. An old soldier, I perceive, said Sherlock. And very recently discharged, remarked his brother. Served in India, I see, and a non-commissioned officer. Royal Artillery, I fancy, said Sherlock. And a widower, but with a child. Children, my boy, children. Come, said I, laughing, this is a little too much. Surely, answered Holmes. It is not hard to say that the man with the bearing, expressing of authority, and sun-baked skin is a soldier, is more than a private, and not long from India. That he has not left the service very long is shown by his still wearing his ammunition boots, as they are called, observed Mycroft. And he had not a heavy cavalry stride, yet he wore his hat on one side, as is shown by the lighter skin on the side of his brow. His weight is against his being a sapper. He is in the artillery. Then, of course, his complete mourning shows that he has lost someone very dear. That he is doing his own shopping looks as though it were his wife. He has been buying things for children, you perceive. There is a rattle, which shows that one of them is very young. The wife probably died in the childbed. The fact that he has a picture book under his arm shows that there is another child that ought to be thought of. I began to wonder what my friend meant when he said that his brother possessed even keener facilities than he did himself. He glanced across to me and smiled. Mycroft took snuff from a tortoiseshell box and brushed away the wandering grains from his coat fronts with a large red silk handkerchief. By the way, Sherlock, said he, I have had something quite after your own heart. A most singular problem, submitted to my judgment. I really had not the energy to follow it up, save for the incomplete fashion, but it gave me the basis for some pleasing speculations. If you would care to hear the facts. My dear Mycroft, I should be delighted. The brother scribbled a note upon the leaf of a pocket-book, and, ringing the bell, he handed it to the waiter. I have asked Mr. Miles to step across, said he. He lodges on the floor above me, and I have some slight acquaintance with him, which led him to come to me in his perplexity. Mr. Miles is a Greek by extraction, and, as I understand, he is a remarkable linguist. He earns his living partly as interpreter in the law courts, and partly by acting as guide to any wealthy Orientals who may visit the Northumberland Avenue hotels. I think I will leave him to tell this very remarkable experience in his own fashion. A few minutes later, we were joined by a short, stout man whose olive face and coal-black hair proclaimed his southern origin. Though his speech was that of an educated Englishman, he shook hands eagerly with Sherlock Holmes, and his dark eyes sparkled with pleasure when he understood that a specialist was anxious to hear his story. I do not believe that the police credit me. On my word, I do not, said he in a wailing voice. Just because they have never heard of it before, they think that such a thing cannot be. But I know I shall never be easy in my mind until I know what has become of my poor man with the sticking plaster upon his face. I am all attention, said Sherlock Holmes. This is Wednesday evening, said Mr. Miles. Well then, it was Monday night, only 2 days ago, as you understand, that this all happened. I'm an interpreter, and perhaps my neighbor there has told you. I interpret languages, or nearly all, but I am Greek by birth and with a Grecian name. It is often associated with tongue that I am principally associated. For many years I have been the chief Greek interpreter in London, and my name is very well known in the hotels. It happens not infrequently that I am sent for at strange hours by foreigners who get into difficulties, or by travelers who arrive late and wish my services. I was not surprised, therefore, on Monday night when a Mr. Latimer, a very fashionably dressed young man, came up to my room and asked me to accompany him in a cab which was waiting at the door. A Greek friend had come to see him upon business, he said, and as he could not speak anything but his own tongue, the services of an interpreter were indispensable. He gave me to understand that his house was some distance off, in Kensington, and he seemed to be in a great hurry, bustling me rapidly into a cab when we had descended to the street. I say into a cab, but I soon became doubtful to whether it was not a carriage in which I found myself. It was certainly more roomy than an ordinary four-wheeled disgrace to London, and the fittings, though frayed, were of rich quality. Mr. Latimer seated himself opposite me, and we started off in Charing Cross and up the Shaftesbury Avenue. We had come out Oxford Street, and I had ventured some remark as to the little giggling laughs in between, but somehow he impressed me with fear more than the other. "What do you want with me?" I asked. "Only ask a few questions of a Greek gentleman who is visiting us, and to let us have the answers, but say no more than you are told to say, or—" It came to a nervous giggle again. "You had better never have been born." As he spoke, he opened the door and showed me the way into the building, which appeared to be very richly furnished, but again the only light was afforded by a single lamp half turned down. The chamber was certainly large, and the way in which my feet sank into the carpet as I stepped across it told me of its richness. I caught glimpses of velvet chairs, a high white marble mantelpiece, and what seemed to be a suit of Japanese armor on one side of it. Ouch. Thank you. There was a chair just under the lamp, and the elderly man motioned that I should sit in it. The younger had left us, but he had suddenly returned as though from another door, leading with him a gentleman clad in some sort of loose dressing gown, who moved slowly towards us. As he came into the circle of dim light which enabled him to be seen more clearly, I was thrilled with horror at his appearance. He was deadly pale and terribly emaciated, with the protruding brilliant eyes of a man whose spirit was greater than that of his strength. But what shocked me more was that any signs of weakness was that his face was grotesquely crisscrossed with sticking plaster, and that one large pad of it was fastened over his mouth. "Have you the slate, Harold?" cried the older man, as the strange being fell rather than sat down into a chair. "Our tenant's loose. Now, then, give him the pencil. You are to ask the questions, Mr. Mellis, and he will write the answers. Ask him first of all whether he is prepared to sign the papers." The man's eyes flashed fire. "Never," he wrote in Greek upon the slate. "On no conditions?" I asked at the bidding of our tyrant. "Only if I see her married in the presence of a Greek priest whom I know." The man giggled in his venomous way. "You know what awaits you, then? I care nothing for myself." These are samples of the questions and answers which made up our strange half-spoken, half-written conversation. Again and again I had to ask him whether he would give in and sign the documents. Again and again I had the same indignant reply. But soon as a happy thought came to me, I took to adding on little sentences of my own to each question. Innocent ones at first, to test whether either of our companions knew anything of the matter, and then, as I found that they showed no sign, I played a more dangerous game. Our conversation ran something more like this. You can do no good by this obstinacy. Who are you? I cannot. I am a stranger in London. Your fate will be on your own head. How long have you been here? Let it be so. 3 weeks. The property can never be yours. What ails you? It shall not go to villains. They are starving me. You shall go free if you sign. What house is this? I will never sign. I do not know. You are not doing her any service. What is your name? Let me hear her say so. Pt11. You shall see her if you sign. Where are you from? Then I shall never see her. Athens. Another 5 minutes, Mr. Holmes, and I should have wormed out the whole story from their very noses. My very next question might have cleared the matter up, but at an instant the door opened and a woman stepped into the room. I could not see her clearly enough to know more than she was tall and graceful, with black hair, and clad in some sort of loose white gown. Harold, she said, speaking English with a broken accent, I cannot stay away longer. It is only lonely up there, and you... Oh, my God! It is Paul! His last 3 words were in Greek, and at the same instant the man, with a convulsive effort, tore the plaster from his lips, and screaming out, Sophie! Sophie! Rushed into the woman's arms. Their embrace was but for an instant, however, for the younger man seized the woman and pushed her out of the room, while the elder easily overpowered his emaciated victim and dragged him away through the other door. For a moment I was left alone in the room, and I sprang to my feet with some vague idea that I might in some way get a clue to what this house was in which I had found myself. Fortunately, however, I took no steps, for looking up I saw that the older man was standing in the doorway, with his eyes fixed upon me. That will do, Mr. Mellis, said he. You perceive that we have taken you into the confidence over some very private business. We should not have troubled you, only that our friend who speaks Greek and who began these negotiations has been forced to return to the East. It was quite necessary for us to find someone to take his place, and we were fortunate in hearing of your powers. I bowed. There are 5 sovereigns here, said he, walking up to me, which will, I hope, be a sufficient fee. But remember, he added, tapping me lightly on the chest and giggling, if you speak to a human soul about this, one human soul, well, may God have mercy upon your soul. I cannot tell you the loathing and horror with which the insignificant-looking man inspired me. I could see him better now as the lamplight shone upon him. His features were peaky and shallow, and his little pointed beard was thready and ill-nourished. He pushed his face forward as he spoke, with his lips and eyelids were confidently twitching like a man with St. Vitus's disease. I could not help thinking that his strange, catchy little laugh was also a symptom of this nervous malady. The terror of his face lay in his eyes, however, steel gray, and glistening coldly with the malignant, inexorable cruelty in their depths. We shall know if you speak of this, he said. We have our own means of information. Now, you will find the carriage waiting, and my friend will see you to your way. I was hurried through the hall and into the vehicle, again obtaining the momentary glimpse of the trees and the garden. Mr. Latimer followed closely at my heels and took his place opposite me without a word. In silence, we again drove for indeterminable distance, with the windows raised, until at last, just after midnight, the carriage pulled up. "You will get out here, Mr. Mellis," said my companion. "I am sorry to leave you so far from your house, but there is no alternative. Any attempt upon your part to follow the carriage can only lead in injury to yourself." He opened the door as he spoke, and I had hardly time to spring out when the coachman lashed the horse, and the carriage rattled away. I looked around me in astonishment. I was on some sort of heathy common mottled over with clumps of fir-breeze bushes. Far away stretched a line of houses with a light here and there in the upper windows. On the other side, I saw red signal lamps of a railway. The carriage which had brought me was already out of sight. I stood gazing around and wondering where I was, when I saw something coming towards me in the darkness. He came up to me, and I made out that he was a railway porter. "Can you tell me where this place is?" I asked. "Wandsworth Common," said he. "Can I get a train into town?" "If you walk on a mile or so to Chaplin Junction," he said, "you'll be just in time for the last of Victoria." So, that was the end of my adventure, Mr. Holmes. I do not know where I was, nor whom I spoke with, nor said anything save what I have told you. But I know that there is foul play going on, and I want to help that unhappy man if I can. I told the whole story to Mr. Mycroft Holmes next morning, and subsequently to the police. We all sat in silence for some little while after listening to this extraordinary narrative. Then Sherlock looked across at his brother. "Any steps?" he asked. Mycroft picked up the Daily News, which was lying on the side table. "Anybody supplying any information as to where the bats of the Greek gentleman named Paul Crates from Athens who is unable to speak English will be rewarded. A similar reward paid to anyone giving information about the Greek lady whose first name is Sophie, X2473. That was in the dailies, but no answer. "How about the Greek legislation?" "I have inquired. They know nothing." "A wire to the head of the Athens police, then." "Sherlock has all the energy of the family," said Mycroft, turning to me. "Well, you take up the case by all means, and let me know if you do any good." "Certainly," answered my friend, rising from his chair. "I'll let you know. And Mr. Mealis, in the meantime, Mr. Mealis, I would certainly be on my guard if I were you, for of course they must know that these advertisements that you have betrayed them." As we walked home together, Holmes stopped at a telegraph and sent off a few wires. "You see, Watson," he remarked, "our evening has been by no means wasted. Some of my most interesting cases have come to me by the way through Mycroft. The problem which we have just listened to, although it can admit that but one explanation, has still some distinguished features." "You have hopes of solving it?" "Well, knowing as much as we do, it will be a singular indeed if we fail to discover the rest. You must yourself have formed some theory which will explain the facts to which we have listened." "In a vague way, yes." "What was your idea, then?" "It seemed to me obvious that this Greek girl had been carried off by the young Englishman named Harold Latimer." "Carried off from where?" "Athens, perhaps." Sherlock Holmes shook his head. This young man could not talk a word of Greek. The lady could talk English fairly well. Inference that she had been in England for some time, but he had not been to Greece. "Well, then, we'll presume that she had come once on a visit to England, and that thus Harold had persuaded her to fly with him." "That is more probable." "Then the brother, for that, I fancy, must be the relationship. Comes over from Greece to interfere." He instantly puts himself into the power of the young man and his older associate. They seize him and use violence to persuade him in order to make him sign some papers to make over the girl's fortune, of which he may be the trustee to them. This he refuses to do. In order to negotiate with him, they have to get an interpreter, and they pitch this upon Mr. Midas, having used some other one before. The girl is not told of the arrival of her brother, and finds it out with the merest accident. "Excellent, Watson," cried Holmes. "I really fancy that you are not far from the truth. You see that we hold all the cards, and we have only to fear some sudden act of vengeance on their part. If they give us time, we must have them. But how can we find ourselves where this house lies?" "Well, if your conjecture is correct, the girl's name is or was Sophocrates. We should have no difficulty in tracing her. That must be our main hope, for her brother is, of course, a complete stranger. It is clear that some time has elapsed since Harold established his relations with the girl, some weeks at any rate, since the brother in Greece has had time to hear of it and come across. If they have been living in the same place during this time, it is probable that we shall have some answer to Mycroft's advertisements." We had reached our house in Baker Street when we had been talking. Holmes ascended to the stair first, and as he opened the door to our room, he gave a start of surprise. Looking over his shoulder, I was equally astonished. His brother Mycroft was sitting smoking in his armchair. I think sound alerts are turned off. Yeah, sound alerts are turned off. Oops. "Come in, Sherlock. Come in, sir," said blandly, smiling at our surprised faces. "You don't expect much energy from me, do you, Sherlock? But somehow this case attracts me." "How did you get here?" "I passed you in a hansom." "There has been some new developments?" "I had an answer for the advertisement." "Ah, yes, it came within a few minutes of your leaving." "And to what effect?" Mycroft Holmes took out the sheet of paper. "Here it is," said he, "written with a J pen on royal cream paper by a middle-aged man with a weak constitution. "Sir," he says, "in answer to your advertisement in today's date, I beg you to inform you that I know the young lady in question very well. If you should care to call upon me, I will give you some particulars to be her painful history. She is living at present at the Myrtles in Beckingham. Yours truly, J. Davenport." "He writes from Lower Brixton," said Mycroft Holmes. "Do you not think that we might drive to him now, Sherlock, and learn these particulars?" "My dear Mycroft, the brother's life is more valuable than the sister's story. I think we should call at Scotland Yard for Inspector Gregson, and straight out for Beckenham. We know that a man is being done to death, and every hour may be vital." "We'd better pick up Mr. Milas on our way," I suggested. "We may need an interpreter." "Excellent," said Sherlock Holmes. "Send the boy for the four-wheeler, and we shall be off at once." He opened the table drawer as we spoke, and I noticed that he slipped his revolver into his pocket. Yes, said he in his answer to my glance. I should say, from what we have heard, that we are dealing with a particularly dangerous man. It was almost dark before we found ourselves in Pall Mall at the rooms of Mr. Milas. A gentleman had called for him, and he was gone. Can you tell me where? Asked Mycroft Holmes. I don't know, sir, answered the woman who had opened the door. I only know that he drove away with the gentleman in the carriage. Did the gentleman have a name? No, sir. He wasn't a tall, handsome, dark young man. Oh, no, sir. He was a little gentleman with glasses, thin in the face, but very pleasant in his ways, for he was laughing all the time that he was talking. Come along, cried Sherlock Holmes abruptly. This grows serious. He observed as we drove to Scotland Yard. These men have got a hold of Milas again. He is a man of no physical courage, as they have well aware from the experience from the other night. This villain is able to terrorize him in an instant that he got into his presence. No doubt that he wants his professional services, but having used them, they may be inclined to punish him for what they will regard as his treachery. But our hope is that, by taking train, we might get to Beckenham sooner than the carriage, on reaching Scotland Yard. However, it was more than an hour before we were able to get Inspector Gregson to comply with the legal formalities which would enable us to enter the house. It was 10:15 before we reached London Bridge, and 4:30 before the 4 of us alighted on the Beckenham platform. A drive of half a mile brought us to the Myrtles, a large dark house standing back off from the road on its own grounds. Here we discovered our cab, and we made our way up the drive together. The windows are all dark, remarked the inspector. The house seems deserted. Our birds have flown, the nest empty, said Holmes. Why do you say that? A carriage heavily loaded with luggage has passed during the last hour. The inspector laughed. I saw the wheel tracks and the light of the gas lamp, but where does the luggage come in? You may have observed that the same wheel tracks going the other way, but the outward ones were very much deeper, so much so that we can say certainly that there were a very considerable weight on the carriage. You get a trifle beyond me there, said the inspector, shrugging his shoulders. It will not be an easy door to force, but we will try if we cannot make someone hear us. We hammered loudly at the knocker and pulled at the bell, but without success. Holmes had slipped away, but he came back in a few moments. I have a window open, said he. It is a mercy that you are on the side of the force and not against us, Mr. Holmes, remarked the inspector, as he noted the clever way in which my friend had forced back the catch. Well, I think that under the circumstances we may enter without an invitation. One after the other, we made our way into the large apartment, which was evidently that which Mr. Melis had found himself. The inspector had lit the lantern, and by its light we could see that the two doors, the curtain, the lamp, and the suit of Japanese mail was as described by them. On the table lay 2 glasses, 1 empty brandy bottle, and the remains of a meal. What is that? Asked Holmes quietly. We all stood still and listened. A low moaning sound was coming from somewhere over our heads. Holmes rushed for the door and ran out into the hall. The dismal noise came from upstairs. He dashed up, the inspector and I at his heels, while his brother Mycroft followed us as quickly as his great bulk would permit. 3 doors faced us on the second floor, and it was from the central that we heard the sinister sounds that were issuing, striking sometimes into a dull mumble and rising again into a shrill whine. It was locked, but the key had been left on at the outside. Holmes flung open the door and rushed in, but he was out again in an instant, with his hand to his throat. It's charcoal, he cried. Give it time. It will clear. Peering in, we could see that the only light in the room was from a dull blue flame which flickered from a small brass tripod in the center. It threw a livid, unnatural circle on the floor, while the shadows beyond we saw a vague loom of two figures which crouched against the wall. From the open door we reeked of a horrible, poisonous exhalation, which set us gasping and coughing. Holmes rushed to the top of the stairs to draw in the fresh air, and then, dashing into the room, he threw open the window and hurled a brazen tripod out into the garden. "We can enter in a minute," he gasped, darting out again. "Where's a candle? I doubt if we strike a match in that atmosphere. Hold the light at the door, and we shall get them out, Mycroft. Now!" With a rush, we got to the poisoned men and dragged them out into the well-lit hall. Both of them were blue-lipped and insensible, with swollen, congested faces and protruding eyes. Indeed, so distorted were their features that, save for his black beard and stout figure, we might have failed to recognize one of them as the Greek interpreter, who had parted from us only a few hours before at the Diogenes Club. His hands and feet were securely strapped together, and he bore over one eye the marks of a violent blow. The other, who was secured in a similar fashion, was a tall man in the last stage of emaciation, with several strips of sticking plaster arranged in a grotesque pattern over his face. He had ceased to moan as we laid him down, and at a glance showed me that for him, at least, our aid had not come too late. Mr. Millis, however, survived, and in less than an hour, with the aid of ammonia and brandy, I had the satisfaction of seeing him open his eyes, and of knowing that my hand had drawn him back from that dark valley in which all paths meet. It was a simple story which he had to tell, and one which did but confirm our own deductions. His visitor, on entering his rooms, had drawn a life-preserver from his sleeve, and had so impressed him with it the fear of a notable death that he kidnapped him for a second time. Indeed, it was almost mesmeric, the effect which this giggling ruffian had produced upon the unfortunate linguist, for he could not speak of him save with trembling hands and a blanched cheek. He had been taken swiftly to Beckenham, and had acted as an interpreter in a second interview, even more dramatic than the first, in which the two Englishmen had menaced their prisoner with instant death if he did not comply to their demands. Finally, finding him proof against every threat, they had hurled him back into his prison, and after reproaching Manus with his treachery, which appeared from the newspaper advertisement, they had stunned him with a blow with a stick, and remembered nothing more until he was found us bending over him. And this was a singular case of the Grecian interpreter, and the explanation of which is still involved in some mystery. We were able to find out, by communicating with the gentleman who had answered the advertisement, that the unfortunate young lady came of a wealthy Grecian family, and that she had been on a visit for some friends in England. While there she had met a young man named Harold Littimer, and who had acquired an ascendancy over him, and had eventually persuaded her to fly with him. Her friends, shocked at the event, had contented themselves with informing her brother at Athens, and had then washed their hands of the matter. The brother, on his arrival to England, had unprudently placed himself in the power of Latimer and of his associate, whose name was Wilson Kemp, a man of the foulest accidents. These two, finding that his ignorance of the language, he was helpless in their hands, and kept him prisoner, and had endeavored to cruelly and starvation to make him sign away his own and his sister's property. They had kept him in the house without the girl's knowledge, and the plaster over his face had been for the purpose of making recognition difficult in case she should ever catch a glimpse of him. Her feminine perceptions, however, had instantly seen through the disguise when, on the occasion of the interpreter's visit, she had seen him for the first time. The poor girl, however, was prisoner herself, and there was no one at the house except for the man who acted as coachman and his wife, both of whom were tools of the conspirators. Finding that their secret was out, and that their prisoner was not to be coerced, the two villains with the girl fled away at a few hours' notice in the furnished house which they had hired, having first, as I had thought, taken vengeance upon the man who had defied and the man who had betrayed them. Months afterwards, a curious newspaper cutting reached us from Budapest. It told of how two Englishmen who had been traveling with a woman had met their tragic end. They had each been stabbed, it seems, and the Hungarian police were of the opinion that they had quarreled and had inflicted mortal injuries upon each other. Holmes, however, is, I fancy, of a different way of thinking that he holds to this day. If he could find the Grecian girl, one might learn how the wrongs of herself and her brother came to be avenged. Ow. Okay. Yeah. I think the girl did it. Not that, no. Grecian woman. They do have some. Uh, I'm going to test the sound again just because I'm kind of curious if it's working. I'm going to do this one. Cool. Did you guys hear that one? If I have it set up right, the sound alerts don't show up on the VOD. I haven't tested the third yet, but hopefully it'll work that way. Did that play? See, I'm hearing them. Are you guys hearing them? Oh. But anyway, let's get into the second story, which is the Naval Treaty. The July which immediately succeeded my marriage was made memorable by three cases of interest, in which I had the privilege of being associated with Sherlock Holmes and of studying his methods. I find them recorded in my notes under the headings of The Adventures of the Second Stain, The Adventure of the Naval Treaty, and The Adventures of the Tired Captain. The first of these, however, deals with the interests of such importance and implicates so many of the first families in the kingdom that for many years it will be impossible to make it public. No case, however, in which Holmes was engaged was ever illustrated the value of his analytical methods so clearly, or has impressed those who were associated with them so deeply. I still retain the almost verbatim report of the interview, in which he was demonstrated the true facts of the case to Monsieur W. of the Paris police, and to Fritz von Waldheim, a well-known specialist from Danzig, both of whom had wasted their energies upon what proved to be side issues. The new century will have come, however, before the story can be safely told. Meanwhile, I pass on the second to my list, which promised also at one time to be of national importance, and was marked for several incidents which give it quite unique character. During my school days, I had been intimately associated with a lad named Percy Phelps, who was of much the same age as myself, though he was 2 classes ahead of me. He was a very brilliant boy and carried away every prize which stood in the school had to offer, finishing his exploits by winning a scholarship which sent him on to continue his triumphant career at Cambridge. He was, I remember, extremely well connected, and even when we were little boys together, we knew that his mother's brother was Lord Holhurst, the great conservative politician. This gaudy relationship did him little good at school. On the contrary, it seemed rather piquant thing to us to chevy him about on the playground and hit him over the shins with a wicket. But it was another thing when he came out into the world. I heard vaguely that his abilities and the influence which he had commanded had won him a good position at the Foreign Office, and I have no doubt that you remember the Tadpole Phelps, who was in the 5th form when you were in the 3rd. It is possible even that you may have heard that through my uncle's influence I obtained a good appointment at the Foreign Office, and that I was in the station of trust and honor until a horrible misfortune came suddenly to blast my career. There is no use writing the details of that dreadful event. In the event of your acceding to my requests, it is probable that I shall arrive to narrate them to you. I have only recovered from 9 weeks of brain fever, and am now exceedingly weak. Do you think that you could bring your friend Mr. Holmes down to see me? I should like to have his opinion of the case, though the authorities assure me that nothing more can be done. Do try to bring him down, and as soon as possible. Not appreciate his talents, but because I have been off my head for some since the blow fell. Now I am clear again, though I dare not think of it too much for fear of a relapse. I am still so weak that I have to write, as you see, by dictating. Do try to bring him. Your old schoolfellow, Percy Phelps. There was something that touched me as I read this letter, something pitiable in the reiterated appeals of bringing Holmes. So moved was I that it had even been a difficult matter that I should have tried it. But of course, I knew well that Holmes loved his art, so that he was ever ready to bring his aid to the client could receive it. My wife agreed with me that not a moment should be lost in laying the matter before him. So within an hour of breakfast time, I found myself back once more in the old rooms at Baker Street. Holmes was seated at his side table, clad in his dressing gown, and working over a chemical investigation. A large curved retort was boiling feverishly in the bluish flame of a Bunsen burner, and the distilled drops were condensing into a 2-liter measure. My friend hardly glanced up as I entered, and I, seeing that his investigation must be of importance, seated myself in an armchair and waited. He dipped into the bottle, drawing out of a few drops of each in this glass pipette, and finally brought the test tube containing the solution over to the table. In his right hand he held a slip of litmus paper. "You have come at crisis, Watson," said he. "If this paper remains blue, all is well. If it turns red, it means in a man's life." He dipped it into the test tube, and it flushed once into a dull, dirty crimson. "I thought as much," he cried. "I will be at your service in an instant, Watson. You will find tobacco in the Persian slipper." He turned to his desk and scribbled off several telegrams, which were handed over to the page boy. Then he threw himself down in the chair opposite and drew up his knees until his fingers clasped around his long, thin shins. "A very commonplace little murder," said he. "You've got something better, I rated attention." "It does not tell us very much, does it?" he remarked, as he handed it back to me. "Hardly anything. And yet the writing is of interest. But the writing is not his own. Precisely. It is a woman's." "A man's, surely," I cried. "No, a woman's, and a woman of rare character. You see, at the commencement of the investigation, it is something to know that your client is in close contact with someone who, for good or evil, has an exceptional nature. My interest is already awakened to the case. If you are ready, we will start at once for working, and see this diplomatist who is in such evil case, and the lady to whom he dictates his letters." We were fortunate enough to catch an early train at Waterloo, and in little under an hour we found ourselves among the fir woods and the heather of walking. Briarbrae proved to be a large detached house standing in extensive grounds within a few minutes' walk of the station. On sending in our cards, we were shown into an elegant appointed drawing-room, where we were joined in a few minutes by a rather stout man who received us much with hospitality. His age may have been nearer 40 than 30, but his cheeks were so ruddy and his eyes so merry that he still conveyed the impression of a plump and mischievous boy. "I'm so glad that you have come," said he, shaking our hands in effusion. "Percy, you've been inquiring for you all the morning. Poor old chap, he clings to any straw. His father and his mother asked me to see you, for the mere mention of the subject is very painful to him." "We have had no details yet," observed Holmes. "I perceive that you are not yourself a member of the family." Our acquaintance seemed surprised, and then, glancing down, he began to laugh. "Of course you saw the J.H. monogram on my locket," said he. "For a moment I thought you had done something clever. Joseph Harrison is my name, and as Percy is to marry my sister Annie, I shall at least be the relation by marriage. You will see my sister in his room, for she has nursed him back hand and foot for the last 2 months. Perhaps we'd better go in at once, for I know how impatient he is." The chamber in which we were shown was on the same floor as the drawing-room. It was furnished partly as a sitting and partly as a bedroom, with flowers arranged daintily in every nook and corner. A young man, very pale and worn, was lying upon a sofa near an open window, through which came the rich scent of the garden and of the balmy summer air. A woman was sitting beside him, whose rose as we entered. "Shall I leave, Percy?" she asked. He clutched her hand to detain her. "How are you, Watson?" he said cordially. "I should never have known you under that mustache, and I dare say you would not have been prepared to swear to me. This, I presume, is your celebrated friend, Mr. Sherlock Holmes? I introduced him in a few words, and we were both sat down. The stout young man had left us, but his sister had still remained with her hand in what's that of the invalid. She was a striking-looking woman, a little short and thick for symmetry, but with beautiful olive complexion, large dark Italian eyes, and a wealth of deep black hair. Her rich tints made the white face of her complexion the more worn and haggard by the contrast. I won't waste your time, said he, raising himself upon the sofa. I'll plunge into the matter without further preamble. I was a happy and successful man, Mr. Holmes, and on the even of being married, when a sudden and dreadful misfortune wrecked all of my prospects in life. I say, as Watson may have told you in the Foreign Office, and though the influence of my uncle, Lord Holthurst, I rose rapidly to a responsive position. When my uncle became foreign minister in the administration, he gave me several missions of trust, and as I always brought them to a successful conclusion, he came at last to have the utmost confidence in my ability intact. Nearly 10 years ago, to be more accurate, on the 23rd of May, he called me into his private room, and after complimenting me on the good work which I had done, he informed me that he had a new commission of trust for me to execute. This, said he, taking a grey roll of paper, it is of enormous importance that nothing further should leak out. The French or the Foreign Embassy would pay an immense sum to learn the contents of these papers. They should not leave my bureau were it not that this absolutely necessary to have them copied. You have a desk in your office? Yes, sir. Then take the treaty and lock it up there. I shall give directions that you may remain behind when the others go, so that you may copy it at your leisure without fear of being overlooked. When you have finished, relock both the original and the draft in the desk, and hand them over to me personally tomorrow morning. I took the papers and... Excuse me for an instant, said Holmes. Were we alone during this conversation? Absolutely. In a large room, 30 feet each way. In the center? Yes, about it. And speaking low. My uncle's voice is remarkably low. I hardly spoke at all. Thank you, said Holmes, shutting his eyes. Pray, go on. I did exactly what he indicated and waited until the other clerks had departed. One of them in my room, Charles Garreau, had some arrears of work to make up, so I left him there and I went out to dine. When I returned, he was gone. I was anxious to hurry my work, for I knew that that Mr. Harrison, whom you saw just now, was in town, and that he traveled down from walking by 11 o'clock train, and I wanted, if possible, to catch it. When I came to examine the treaty, I saw at once that it was of such importance that my uncle had been guilty of no exaggeration in what it said. Without going into details, I may say that it defined the position of Great Britain towards the Triple Alliance, and foreshadowed the policy which this country would pursue in the event of the French fleet gaining complete ascendancy over that of Italy in the Mediterranean. The questions treated in it were purely naval, and the end of the signatures of the high dignitaries who had signed it. I glanced my eyes over it, then settled down on my task copying. It was a long document written in the French language and containing 26 separate articles. I copied as quickly as I could, but at 9 o'clock I had done 9 articles, and it seemed hopeless for me to attempt to catch my train. I was feeling drowsy and stupid, partly from my dinner and also from the effects of a long day's work. A cup of coffee would clear my brain. A commissionaire remained all night in the little lodge at the foot of the stairs, and is in the habit of making coffee at his spirit lamp for any of the officials who may be working overtime. I rang the bell, therefore, to summon him. To my surprise, it was a woman who answered the summons, a large, coarse-faced, elderly woman in the apron. She explained that she was the commissionaire's wife, who did the chairing, and I gave her the order for my coffee. I wrote 2 more articles, and then, feeling more drowsy than ever, I rose and walked up and down the room to stretch my legs. My coffee had not come yet, and I wondered what the cause of the delay could be. Opening the door, I started down the corridor to find out. There was a straight passage, dimly lit, which led from the room in which I had been working, and was the only exit from it. It ended in a curving staircase, with the commissioner's lodge at the passage at the bottom. Halfway down the staircase is a small landing, with another passage running into it from right angles. The second one leads by means to a second small stair in the side door, used by servants, and also to a shortcut by the clerks when coming from Charles Street. Here's a rough chart of the place. Thank you. I think I will quite follow you, said Sherlock Holmes. It is of utmost importance that you should notice at this point I went down the stairs and into the hall, where I found the commissioner fast asleep in his box, with the kettle boiling furiously over upon the spirit lamp. I took off the kettle and blew out the lamp, for the water was spurting over the floor. Then I put out my hand and was about to shake the man, who was still sleeping soundly, when the bell overhead rang loudly, and he woke with a start. "Mr. Phelps, sir," said he, looking at me in bewilderment. "I came down to see if my coffee was ready." "I was boiling the kettle when I fell asleep, sir." He looked at me, and then up at me, still quivering bell, and the ever-growing astonishment upon his face. "If you are here, sir, then who rang the bell?" he asked. "The bell!" I cried. "What bell is it?" "It's the bell from the room that you were working in." A cold hand seemed to close around my heart. Someone, then, was in that room with the precious treaty that lay upon the table. I ran frantically up the stair and along the passage. There were no one else in the corridors. There was no one in the room. All was exactly as I left it, save only that the papers which had been committed to my care had been taken from the desk on which they lay. The copy was there, and the original was gone. Holmes sat up in his chair and rubbed his hands. I could see that the problem was entirely to his heart. "Pray, what did you do then?" he murmured. I recognized in an instant that the thief must have come up the stairs from the side door. Of course, I must have met him as if he had come the other way. "You are satisfied that he could not have come from the concealed in the room at the time, or in the corridor which you have just described as dimly lighted?" "It is absolutely impossible. A rat could not conceal himself either in the room or in the corridor. There is no cover at all." "Thank you. Pray proceed." "The commissioner, seeing my pale face that something was to be feared, had followed me upstairs. Now we both rushed along the corridor and down the steep steps which led to Charles Street. The door at the bottom was closed, but unlocked. We flung it open and rushed out. I can distinctly remember that we did so, as there came 3 chimes in the neighboring clock. It was 9:15. The night was very dark, and a thin, warm rain was falling. There was no one on Charles Street, but a great traffic was going on, as usual, in Whitehall, at the extremity. We rushed along the pavement, bareheaded as we were, and at the far corner we found a policeman standing. "A robbery has been committed," I gasped. "A document of immense value has been stolen from the Foreign Office. Has anyone passed this way?" "I've been standing here for a quarter of an hour," said he. "Only one person has passed that time, a woman, tall and elderly, in a paisley shawl." "Ah, that is only my wife," cried the commissioner. "No one else has passed?" "No one." "It must be the other way the thief took," cried the fellow, tugging at my sleeve. But I was not satisfied, and the attempts which he made to draw me away increased my suspicions. "Which way did the woman go?" I cried. "I don't know, sir. I noticed her pass, but I had no special reason for watching her. She seemed to be in a hurry." "How long ago was it?" "Oh, not very 20 minutes. Within the last 5. "Well, it could not have been more than 5. "You're only wasting our time, sir, and every minute is now of importance," cried the commissionaire. "Take my word for it that my old woman has nothing to do with it, and come down to the other end of the street. Well, if you won't, I will." And with that he rushed off in the other direction. "Where do you live?" said I. "16 Ivy Lane, Brixton," he answered. "But don't let yourself be drawn upon in my false scent, Mr. Phelps. Come to the other end of the street, and let us see where we hear nothing." Nothing was to be lost by following his advice. With the policeman we both hurried down, but only to find the street full of traffic. Many people coming and going, but only too eager to be safe upon so wet a night. There was no longer who would tell who had passed. Then we returned to the office and searched the stairs and the passage without result. The corridor which led to the room was laid down within a kind of creamy linoleum which shows an impression very easily. We examined it very carefully, but found no outline of any footmark. "I had been reading all evening, since about 7. How is it, then, that the woman who came into the room at 9 left no traces without her muddy boots?" "I'm glad you raised that point. It occurred to me that at the time the chairwoman though the night was a wet one. The chain of events is certainly an extraordinary interest. What did you do next?" "We examined the room also. There was no possibility of a secret door, and the windows are quite 30 feet above the ground. Both of them were fastened on the inside. The copper prevents any possibility of a trap door, and the ceiling is of the extraordinary whitewashed kind. I would pledge my life that whoever stole my papers could have only come through that door." "What about the fireplace?" "They use none. There's a stove. A bell rope hangs from a wire just to the right of it under my desk. Whoever rang it must have come right up to the desk to do it. But why should the criminal wish to ring the bell? It is a most unsolvable mystery." "Certainly, the incident is unusual. What were your next steps? You examined the room, I presume, to see if the intruder left any other traces, any cigar ends or dropped glove or hairpin of trifle." "Worth a great deal to such an investigation." "I never smoke myself, so I think I would have observed it if there had been a smell of tobacco. There was absolutely no clue of any kind. The only tangible fact was that the commissionaire's wife, Mrs. Tangy was the name, was hurried out of the place. He could give no explanation save that it was time when the woman always went home. The policeman and I agreed that our best plan was to seize the woman before she could get rid of the papers, presuming that she had them. The alarm had reached Scotland Yard by this time, and Mr. Forbes, the detective, came round at once and took up the case with a great deal of energy. We hired a hansom, and in half an hour were at the address which had been given to us. A young woman opened the door, who proved to be Mrs. Changy's eldest daughter. Her mother had not come back yet, and we were shown into the front room to wait. About 10 minutes later, a knock at the door, and then we made one serious mistake for which I blame myself. Instead of opening the door ourselves, we allowed the girl to do so. We heard her say, "Mother, there are 2 men in the house waiting to see you," and an instant afterwards we heard the patter of feet rushing down the passage. Forbes flung open the door, and we both ran into the back room of the kitchens, but the woman had got there before us. She stared at us in defiant eyes, and then suddenly recognizing me, an expression of absolute astonishment came over her face. if it isn't Mr. Helps from the office, she cried. Come, come, why did you think we were here after you ran away from us? Asked my companion. I thought you were the brokers. We've had some trouble with the tradesmen. That's not quite good enough, answered Forbes. We have reason to believe that you have taken a paper of importance from the Foreign Office, and that you ran here to dispose of it. You must come back with us to Scotland Yard to be searched. It was in vain that she protested and resisted. A four-wheeler was brought, and we all three drove back to it. We had made the first examination in the kitchen, and especially of the kitchen fire, to see whether she might have made away with the papers during the instant that she was alone. There were no signs, however, of any ashes or scraps. When we reached Scotland Yard, she was handed over at once to the female searcher. I waited in agony of suspense until she came back with the report. There was no sign of papers. Then for the first time the horror of my situation came into full force. Hitherto I had been acting, and action had numbed thought. I had been so confident of regaining the treaty at once that I had not dared to think of what would be the consequence if I failed to do so. But now there was nothing more to be done, and I had leisure to realize my position. It was horrible. Watson there would tell you that I was a nervous, sensitive boy in school. What though I was the victim of an extraordinary incident? No allowance is made for accidents when diplomatic interests are at stake. I was ruined, shamefully, hopelessly ruined. I don't know what I did. I fancy I must have made the scene. I have a dim recollection of a group of officials who crowded around me, endeavoring to soothe me. One of them drove down with me to Waterloo, and saw me in the working train. I believe that he would have come all the way had it not been that Dr. Ferrer, who lives near me, was going down by the very train. The doctor most kindly took charge of me, and it was well that he did so, for I had a fit in the station, and before I reached home I was practically a raving maniac. You can imagine the state of things here when they were roused from their beds by the doctor's ringing and found me in my condition. Poor Annie here and my mother were heartbroken. Dr. Ferrer had just heard enough from the detective at the station to be able to give an idea of what had happened, and his story did not mend matters. It was evident to all that I was in for a long illness, so Joseph was bundled out of his cheery bedroom, and it was turned into a sick room for me. Here I have lain, Mr. Holmes, for over 9 weeks, unconscious and raving with brain fever. If it had not been for Miss Harrison here, and for the doctor's care, I should be not speaking with you right now. She has nursed me by day, and hired nurses looked after me by night for my mad fits. I'm capable of anything. Slowly, my reason is cleared, and it is only during the last 3 days that my memory has quite returned. Sometimes I wish it had never had. First thing that I did was to write to Mr. Forbes, who had the case in hand, who came out and assures me that, though everything has been done, no trace of a clue has been discovered. The commissioner and his wife have been examined in every way without the light being thrown upon the matter. The suspicions of the police then rested upon young Carrot, who, as you may remember, stayed overtime in the office that night. His remaining behind and his French name were really the only 2 points which could suggest suspicion. But, as a matter of fact, I did not begin work until he had gone, and his people were of the Huguenot extraction, but as English in sympathy and tradition as you and I are. Nothing was found to implicate him in any way, and there was the matter dropped. I turn to you, Mr. Holmes, as absolutely my last hope. If you fail me, then my honor as well as my position are forfeited forever. Linwood sank back into his cushions, tired out by the long recital. while his nurse poured him out a glass of something stimulating medicine. Holmes sat silently, with his head thrown back and his eyes closed, in an attitude which might seem listless to a stranger, but which I knew betokened the most intense self-absorption. Your statement has been so explicit, he said at last, that you have really left me very few questions to ask. There is one of the very utmost importance, however. Did you tell anyone that you had this special task to perform? No one. Not Miss Harrison here, for example. No, I had not been back to walking between getting the order and executing the commission. And none of your people had by chance seen to you. None. Did any of them know their way about the office? Oh, yes, all of them have been shown over it. Still, of course, if you said nothing to anyone about the treaty, these inquiries are irrelevant. I said nothing. Do you know anything about the commissionaire? Nothing except that he's an old soldier. What regiment? Oh, I've heard. Coldstream Guards. Thank you. I have no doubt I can get the details from Forbes. The authorities are excellent at amassing facts, though they do not always use them to their advantage. What a lovely thing a rose is. He walked past the couch to the open window and held up a drooping stalk of a moss rose, looking down at the dainty blend of crimson and green. It was a new phase of his character for me, for I had never before seen him show any keen interest in natural objects. There's nothing in which the deduction is so necessary as in religion, said he, leaning his back against the shutters. It can be built up as an exact science by the reasoner. Our highest assurance of the goodness of Providence seems to me to rest in the flowers. All other things, our powers, our desires, our foods, all are really necessary for our existence in the first instance. But this rose is an extra. Its smell and its color are an embellishment of life, not a condition of it. The only goodness which gives extras, and so I say again that we have much to hope from the flowers. Percy Phelps and his nurse looked at Mr. Holmes during his demonstration with surprise, and a good deal of disappointment written upon their faces. He had fallen into a reverie, one with moss rose between his fingers. It had lasted some minutes before the young lady broke in upon it. Do you see any prospect in solving the mystery, Mr. Holmes? She asked with such a touch of asper in her voice. Oh, the mystery, yes. Coming back from the start of the realities of life. Well, it would be absurd to deny that the case is a very abstruse and complicated one, but I can promise you that I will look into the matter and let you know the points which may strike me. Do you have a clue? You have furnished me with 7, but of course I must test them before I can pronounce upon their value. You suspect someone? I suspect myself. What? I've come to conclusions too rapidly. Then go to London and cleanse your conclusions. Your advice is very excellent, Miss Emerson, said Holmes, rising. I think, Watson, we cannot do better. Do not allow yourself to indulge in false hopes, Mr. Phelps. The affair is a very tangled one. I shall be in a fever until I see you again, cried the diplomat. Hey, shaman. Well, I'll come out by train tomorrow, though it's more likely that my report will be a negative one. God bless you for promising to come, cried our client. It gives me a fresh laugh to know that something is being done. By the way, I have a letter from Mr. Holdert. Ha! What did he say? He was cold, but not harsh. I dare say my severe illness prevented him from being that. He repeated that the matter was of the utmost importance, and added that no steps would be taken about my future, by which he means, of course, my dismissal, until my health is restored and I have had an opportunity of repairing my misfortune. Well, that was reasonable and considerate, said Holmes. Come, Watson, for we have a good day's work before us in town. Mr. Joseph Harrison drove us into the station, and we were soon whirring up in a Portsmouth train. Holmes was sunk in profound thought, and hardly opened his mouth until we had passed Champlain Junction. It is a very cheery thing to come into London by means of these lines, which run high and allow you to look down upon the houses like this. I thought he was joking, for the view was sordid enough, but he soon explained himself. Look at those big isolated clumps of buildings rising above the slates, like brick islands on a lead-colored sea. The board schools. Lighthouses, my boy, beacons of the future. Capsules with hundreds of brilliant little seeds in each, out of which will spring the wiser, better England of the future. I suppose that man Phelps does not drink. I should not think so. Nor should I, but we are bound to take every possibility into account. The poor devil has certainly got himself into very deep water, and it is a question whether we shall ever be able to get him ashore. What do you think of Miss Harrison? A girl of strong character. Yes, but she is a good sort, or I am mistaken. She and her brother are the only children of an ironmaster somewhere in Northumberland way. He got engaged to her when traveling last winter, and she came down to be introduced to his people, and her brother as escort. Then came the smash, and she stayed on to nurse her lover, while brother Joseph, finding himself pretty snug, stayed on too. I've been making a few independent inquiries, you see, but today may have been the day of inquiries. My practice, I began. Oh, if you find your own cases more interesting than mine, said Holmes with some asperity. I was going to say that my practice could get along very well for a day or two, and since it is the slackest time of the year. Excellent, said he, recovering his good humor. Then we'll look into this matter together. I think that we should begin by seeing Forbes. He can probably tell us all the details we want until we know what side of the case is to be approached. You said you had a clue. Well, we have several, but we can only test them which we value further inquiry. The most difficult crime to track is one with the most purposeless. Now, this is not purposeless. Who is it who benefits from it? There is the French ambassador, there's the Russian, there's whoever might sell it to either of these, and there's Lord Holdhurst. Lord Holdhurst? Well, it is just conceivable that a statesman might find himself in a position where he was not sorry to have such a document accidentally destroyed. Not a statesman with an honorable record as Lord Holdhurst. It is a possibility we cannot afford to disregard it. We shall see the noble lord today and find out if he can tell us anything. Meanwhile, I have already set inquiries on foot. Already? Yes, I sent wires from Walking Station and the evening paper in London. This advertisement will appear in each of them. He handed over a sheet torn from a notebook. On it was scribbled in pencil. £10 reward, the number of the cab which dropped off a fare at or about the door of the Foreign Office in Charles Street at 9:45 in the evening, May 23rd. Apply 221B Baker Street. You are confident that the thief came in a cab? If not, there's no harm done. But if Mr. Phelps is correct in stating that there was no hiding place either in the room or the corridors, then the person must have come from outside. If he came from outside on so wet a night, and yet left no trace of damp on the linoleum, which was examined within very few minutes of passing, then it is exceedingly probable that he came in a cab. Yes, I think we may safely deduce a cab. It sounds plausible. That is one of the clues of which I spoke. It may lead us to something. And then, of course, there's the bell, which is the most distinctive feature in the case. Why should the bell ring? Was it the thief who did it out of bravado? Or was it someone who was with the thief who did it in order to prevent the crime? Or was it an accident? Or was it... He sank back into the state of intense and silent thought from which he had emerged. But it seemed to me, accustomed as I was to his very mood, that some new possibility had dawned suddenly upon him. It was 3 when we reached our terminus, and after a hasty luncheon at the buffet, we pushed on at once to Scotland Yard. Holmes had already wired to Forbes, and we found him waiting to receive us. A small, foxy man with a sharp, but by no means amiable expression. He was decidedly frigid on his manners to us, especially when he heard the errand upon which we had come. "I've heard of your methods before, Mr. Holmes," he said tartly. "You're ready enough to use them all in this information that the police can lay at your disposal, and then you can try to finish the case yourself and bring discredit on them." "On the contrary," said Holmes. "Out of my last 53 cases, my name has only appeared in 4, and the police have had all the credit in 49. I don't blame you for not knowing this, for you are young and inexperienced, but if you wish to get on with your new duties, you will work with me and not against me." "I'll be very glad of a hint or two," said the detective, changing his manner. "I've certainly had no credit from the case so far." "What steps have you taken?" "Tangery, the commissionaire, has been shadowed. He left with guards of good character, and we can find nothing against him. His wife is a bad lot, though. I fancy she knows more than the papers." "Have you shadowed her?" "We have set one of our own women onto her. Mrs. Tangy drinks, and our woman has been with her twice when she's gone on, but she could get nothing out of her." "I understand that they had brokers in the house." "Yes, but they were paid off." "Where did the money come from?" "That was all right. His pension was due, and they have not shown any sign of being in funds." "What explanation did she give to having answered the bell when Mr. Phelps rang for the coffee?" "She said she was with her husband, and was very tired, and she wished to relieve him." "Well, certainly that would agree with her being found a little later asleep in his chair. There is nothing against him but when the woman's character. Did you ask her why she hurried away that night? Her haste attracted the attention of the police constable." "She was later than usual and wanted to get home." "Did you point out to her that you and Mr. Phelps, who started at least 20 minutes after her, got home before her?" "Because she had the money with which to pay off the brokers." "Ah, she has at least the answer for everything. Did you ask her whether she was leaving? Did she met anyone else loitering on Charles Street?" "She saw no one but the constable." "Well, you seem to have cross-examined her pretty thoroughly. What else have you done?" "The clerk Garrott had been shadowed for all these 9 weeks, but without result. We can show nothing against him." "Anything else?" "Well, we have nothing else to go upon. No evidence of any kind." "Have you formed any theory about how the bell rang?" "Well, I confess that it beats me. It was a cool hand, whoever it was, to go and give the alarm like that." "Yes, it is a queer thing to do. Many thanks to you for what you have told me. But I can put the man in your hands. You shall hear from me. Come along, Watson." Where are we going now? I asked as I left the office. Oldhurst still in his chambers at Downing Street, and on Holmes sending in his card, we were instantly shown up. The statesman received us with that old-fashioned courtesy for which he is remarkable, and seated us upon two luxuriant lounges on either side of the fireplace. Standing on the rug between us, with his slight, tall figure, his sharp features, thoughtful face, and his curling hair permanently tinged with grey, he seemed to represent that not soft too common, a nobleman who is in truth noble. Your name is not very familiar to me, Mr. Holmes, said he, smiling. And whose interest are you acting, may I ask? And that of Mr. Percy Phelps, answered Holmes. Ah, my unfortunate nephew. You can understand that our kinship makes it more impossible for me to screen him in any way. I feel this incident must have a very prejudicial effect upon his career. But if the document is found, well, that would be different. I had one or two questions which I wish to ask you, Lord Holdhurst. I shall be happy to give you any information in my power. Was it from this room that you gave your instructions to the copying of the document? It was. Then you could hardly have been overheard. It is out of the question. Did you ever mention to anyone that it was your intention to give anyone the treaty to be copied? Never. Are you quite certain of that? Absolutely. Well, since you never said so, and Mr. Phelps never said so, and nobody else knew anything of the matter, then the thief's presence in the room was purely accidental. He saw his chance, and he took it. The statesman smiled. You take me out of my providence there, said he. Holmes considered for a moment. There's another very important matter which I wish to discuss with you, said he. You feared, as I understand, that a very grave result may follow from the details of this treaty being known. A shadow passed over the expressive face of the statesman. Very grave results indeed. And have any occurred? Not yet. If the treaty had reached, let us say, the French or the Russian Foreign Office, would you expect to hear of it? I should, said Lord Holmesworth with a wry face. Since nearly 10 weeks have elapsed, then, and nothing has been heard, is it not unfair to suppose that for some reason the treaty has not reached them? Lord Holdhurst shrugged his shoulders. We can hardly suppose, Mr. Holmes, that the thief took the treaty in order to frame it or hang it up. Perhaps he's waiting for a better price. If he waits a little longer, he will get no price at all. The treaty will cease to be secret in a few months. That is most important, said Holmes. Of course, it is a possible supposition that the thief has had a sudden illness. An attack of brain fever, for example? Asked the statesman, casting a swift glance at him. I did not say so, said Holmes impertinently. And now, Lord Holdhurst, we have already taken up too much of your valuable time, and we shall wish you good day. Every success in your investigation, be the criminal who it may be. That's the nobleman as he bowed us out at the door. Well, he's a fine fellow, said Holmes as we came out of the Whitehall, but he has a struggle to keep up his position. He is far from rich, and has many calls. You noticed, of course, that his boots had been resold. Now, Watson, I won't detain you from your legitimate work any longer. I shall do nothing more today unless you have an answer to my cab advertisement. But I should be extremely obliged to you if you would come down with me to working tomorrow and by the same train which we took yesterday. I met him accordingly next morning, and we travelled down to walking together. He had no answer to his advertisement, he said, and no fresh light had been thrown upon the case. He had, when he so willed it, the utter immobility of countenance of a red Indian, and I could not gather from his appearance whether he was satisfied or not with the position of the case. His conversation, I remember, was about the Billiton system of measurement, and he expressed his enthusiastic admiration of the French savant. We found our client still under the charge of his devoted nurse, but looking considerably better than before. He rose from the sofa and greeted us without difficulty when we entered. "Any news?" he asked eagerly. "My report, as I expected, is a negative one," said Holmes. "I have seen Forbes, and I have seen your uncle, and I have set one or two trains of inquiry upon foot which may lead to something." "You've not lost heart, then?" "By no means." "God bless you for saying that," cried Mrs. Patterson. "If we keep our courage and patience, the truth must come out." "Yes, we have had an adventure during the night, and one which might have proved to be a serious one." His expression grew very grave as he spoke, and a look of something akin to fear sprang up in his eyes. "Do you know," said he, "that I began to believe that I am unconscious centre of some monstrous conspiracy, and that my life is aimed at as well as my honour." "Ah!" cried Holmes. "It sounds incredible, for I have not, as far as I know, an enemy in the world, yet from last night's experience I can come to no other conclusion." "Pray, let me hear it." "You must know that last night was the very first night that I have ever slept without a nurse in the room. I was so much better than I thought I could dispose with one. I had a nightlight burning, however. Well, about 2 in the morning I had sunk into light sleep when I was suddenly roused by a slight noise. It was like the sound of a mouse makes when it's gnawing at a plank, and I lay listening to it for some time under the impression that it must come from that cause. Then it grew louder, and suddenly there came from the window a sharp, metallic snick. I sat up in amazement. There could be no doubt that the sounds were now. The first ones had been caused by someone forcing an instrument through the slit between the sashes, and the second by the catch being pressed back. There was a pause for about 10 minutes, as if the person was waiting to see whether the noise had awakened me. Then I heard a gentle creaking noise at the window was very slowly opening. I could not stand it any longer, for my nerves are not what they used to be. I sprang out of bed and flung open the shutters. A man was crouching at the window. I could see little of him, for he was gone like a flash. He was wrapped in some sort of cloak which came across the lower part of his face. One thing I am sure of is that he had some weapon in his hand. It looked to me like a long knife. I distinctly saw the gleam of it as he turned to run. "That is most interesting," said Holmes. "Pray, what did you do then?" "I should have followed him to the open window if I had been stronger. As it was, I rang the bell and roused the house. It took a little time for the bell rings in the kitchen and the servants all sleep upstairs. I shouted, however, and that brought Joseph down, and he roused the others. Joseph and the groom found marks on the bedside outside the window, and the weather had been so dry lately that they found it hopeless to follow the trail across the grass. There's a place, however, on the wooden fence which skirts the road which showed signs, they tell me, as if someone had gotten over it. He had snapped off the top of the rail in doing so. I have said nothing to the local police yet, for I thought it was best to have your opinion first." This tale of our client's appeared to have an extraordinary effect on Sherlock Holmes. He rose from his chair and paced about the room in an uncontrollable excitement. You have misfortunes never come single, said Phelps, smiling, though it was evidence that this adventure had somewhat shaken him. You have certainly had your share, said Holmes. Do you think you could walk around the house with me? Oh, yes. I would like a little sunshine. Joseph will come too. And I also, said Miss Harrison. I'm afraid not, Holmes said, shaking his head. I think I must ask you to remain sitting exactly where you are. The young lady resumed her seat with an air of displeasure. Her brother, however, had joined us, and we set off all four together. We passed around the lawn to the outside of the young diplomat's window. There were, as he had said, marks upon the bed, but they were hopelessly buried and vague. Holmes stooped over them for an instant, and then rose shrugging his shoulders. I don't think anyone could have made much of this, said he. Let us go round the house and see what the particular room was chosen by the burglar. I should have thought those larger windows of the drawing room and the dining room would have had more attractions to him. They were more visible than from the road, suggested Joseph Harrison. Ah, yes, of course. There's a door here, which he might have attempted. What's it for? It's a side entrance for tradespeople. Of course, it's locked at night. Have you ever had an alarm like this before? Never, said our client. Do you keep plate in the house, or anything to attract burglars? Nothing of value. Holmes strolled around the house with his hands in his pockets, with a negligent air which was unusual for him. By the way, he said to Joseph Harrison, you found some place, I understand, where the fellow scaled the fence. Let's have a look at that. The plump young man led us to the spot where the top of one of the wooden rails had been cracked. A small fragment of wood was hanging down. Holmes pulled it off and examined it critically. Do you not think that this was done last night? It looks rather old, does it not? Well, possibly so. There are no marks of anyone jumping down upon the other side. No, I fancy we shall get no help there. Let us go back to the bedroom and talk over the matter. Percy Phelps was walking very slowly, leaning upon the arm of his future brother-in-law. Holmes walked swiftly across the lawn, and we were at the open window of the bedroom long before the others had come up. Miss Harrison, said Holmes, speaking in the utmost intensity of manner, you must stay where you are all day. Let nothing prevent you from staying where you are all day. It is of utmost importance. Certainly, if you wish it, Mr. Holmes, said the girl in astonishment. When you go to bed, lock the door of this room on the outside and keep the key. Promise to do this. But, Percy, he will come to London with us, and I am to remain here. It is for his sake. You can serve him. Quick, promise. She gave a quick nod of assent, just as the other two came up. Why do you sit moping there, Annie? Cried her brother. Come out and enjoy the sunshine. No, thank you, Joseph. I have a slight headache, and this room is deliciously cool and soothing. What do you propose now, Mr. Holmes? Asked our client. Well, in investigating this minor affair, we must not lose sight of our main inquiry. It would be a great help to me if you would come up to London with us. At once? Well, as soon as you conveniently can. Say, in an hour. I feel quite strong enough. It can really be of any help. The greatest possible. Perhaps you would like me to stay there tonight. I was just going to propose it. Then, if my friend of the night comes to revisit me, he will find the bird flown. We're all in your hands, Mr. Holmes, and you must tell me exactly what you would like me to do. Perhaps you would prefer that Joseph came with me to someone to look after me? Oh, no. My friend Watson is a medical man, you know, and he will look after you. We'll have our lunch here, if you will permit us, and then we shall all three set off to town together. It was arranged as he suggested, though Miss Harrison excused herself from leaving the bedroom, in accordance with Holmes's suggestion. What's the object of a friend's maneuvers was I could not conceive, unless it were to keep the lady away from Phelps, who rejoiced by his returning to health, and by the prospect of action, lunched with us in the dining room. Holmes had still more surprising stars for us, however, for after accompanying us down to the station and seeing us into the carriage, he calmly announced that he had no intention of leaving walking. There are one or two points which I would like to clear up before I go, he said. Your absence, Mr. Phelps, will be in some ways rather an assist. Watson, when you reach London, you will oblige me by driving at once to Baker Street with our friend here, and remaining with him until I see you again. It is fortunate that you are old schoolfellows, as you must have much to talk over. Mr. Phelps, you can have the spare bedroom tonight, and I will be with you in time for breakfast, for there is a train which will take me into Waterloo at 8. But how about our investigation in London? Asked Phelps ruefully. We can do that tomorrow. I think that just at the present I can be more immediate use here. You might tell them at Brisbane that I hope to be back tomorrow night, cried Phelps, as we began to move on to the platform. I hardly expect to go back to Briar Basin, answered Holmes, and waved his hand at us as cheerfully as we shot out of the station. Phelps and I talked it over on our journey, but neither of us could devise a satisfactory reason for this new development. Suppose he wants to find some clues as to the burglary last night, if a burglary was. For myself, I don't believe it was an ordinary thief. What's your idea, then? Upon my word, you may put it down to my weak nerves or not, but I believe that there is some deep political intrigue going on around me, and that for some reason that passes my understanding, my life is aimed at by the conspirators. It sounds high-flown and absurd, but consider the facts. Why should a thief try to break in at our bedroom window when there could have been no hope of any plunder? And why should he come with a long knife in hand? Are you sure it was not the housebreakers, Jimmy? No, it was a knife. I saw the flash of the blade quite distinctly. But why on earth should you be pursued by such animosity? That is the question. Well, if Holmes takes a new view, that would account for his action, would it not? Presuming that your theory is correct, if he can lay hands upon the man who threatened you last night, he will have gone a long way towards finding out who took the naval treaty. It is absurd to suppose that you have two enemies, one of whom robs you, while the other threatens your life. But Holmes said that he is not going to Barbary. I have known him a few times, I said, but I never knew him to do anything yet, without a very good reason. And with that, our conversation drifted off into other topics. But it was a weary day for me. Phelps was still weak after his long illness, and his misfortunes made him querulous and nervous. In vain I endeavored to interest him in Afghanistan, in India, and social questions, and anything which might take his mind out of the groove. He would always come back to his lost treaty, wondering, guessing, speculating as to what Holmes was doing, what steps Lord Holquist was taking, and what news we would have in the morning. As the evening wore on, his excitement became quite painful. You have implicit faith in Holmes, asked he. I have seen him do some remarkable things. But he never brought into the light anything quite so dark as this? Oh, yes. I have known him solve questions and prevented fewer clues than yours. but not where such large interests at stake? I don't know that. To my certain knowledge, he has acted on behalf of three of the reigning houses of Europe in very vital matters. But you know him well, Watson. He is such an inscrutable fellow that I never quite know what to make of him. Do you think he is hopeful? Do you think he expects to make a success of it? He has said nothing. That is a bad sign? On the contrary, I have noticed that when he is off on the trail, he is generally so. It is when he is on a scent and is not quite absolutely sure yet that is the right one that he is the most taciturn. Now, my dear fellow, we can't help matters by making ourselves nervous about them, so let me implore you to go to bed and be so fresh for whatever may await us tomorrow. I was able at last to persuade my companion to take my advice, though I knew from his excited manner that there was not much hope in him for getting sleep. Indeed, his mood was infectious, for I lay tossing half the night myself, brooding over this strange problem and inventing 100 different theories, each of which was more impossible than the last. Why had Holmes remained in Woking? Why had he asked Miss Harrison to remain in the sick room all day? Why had he been so careful not to inform the people of Bribery that he intended to remain near them? I cudgelled my brains until I fell asleep in the endeavour to find some explanation which would cover all these facts. It was 7 o'clock when I woke, and I set off at once for Phelps' room to find him haggard and spent after a sleepless night. His first question was whether Holmes had arrived yet. "He'll be here when he promised," said I, "and not an instant sooner or later." And my words were true, for shortly after 8 a hansom dashed up to the door, and our friend got out of it. Standing in the window, we saw that his left hand was swathed in a bandage, and that his face was very grim and pale. He entered the house, but it was some long time before he came up the stairs. "He looks like a beaten man," cried Phelps. I was forced to confess that he was right. "After all," said I, "the clue of the matter lies probably here in town." Phillips gave a groan. "I don't know how it is," he said, "but I had hoped for so much from his return. But surely his hand was not tied up like that yesterday. What could be the matter?" "You are not wounded, Holmes?" I asked as my friend entered the room. "Tut! It is only a scratch through my own clumsiness," he answered, nodding his good morning to us. "This case of yours, Mr. Phelps, is certainly one of the darkest which I have ever investigated." "I fear that you might find it beyond you." "It has been a most remarkable experience." "The bandage tells of adventures," said I. "Won't you tell us what happened?" "After breakfast, my dear Watson. Remember that I have breathed 30 miles of Surrey air this morning. I suppose that there has been no answer for my cabman advertisement. Well, we cannot expect to score every time." The table was all laid, and just as I was about to ring, Miss Hudson entered with our tea and coffee. A few minutes later she brought up 3 covers, and we all drew up to the table. Holmes ravenous, I curious, and Phelps in the gloomiest state of depression. "Mrs. Hudson has risen to the occasion," said Holmes, uncovering a dish of curried chicken. "Her cuisine is a little limited, but she has a good idea of breakfast as a Scotchwoman. What have you there, Watson?" "Ham and eggs," I answered. "Good. And what are you going to take, Mr. Phelps? Curried fowl or eggs, or will you help yourself?" "Oh, thank you, I can eat nothing," said Phelps. "Oh, come, try the dish before you." "Thank you, I'd really rather not." "Well, then," said Holmes with a mischievous twinkle, "I suppose that you have no objection to helping me." Phelps raised the cover, and as he did so uttered a scream, and sat there staring with a white face as he plate. It was madly about the room, pressing it to his bosom and shrieking out with delight. Then he fell back into an armchair, so limp and exhausted with his own emotions that we had to pour brandy down his throat to keep him from fainting. There, there, said Holmes soothingly, patting him on the shoulder. It was too bad to spring it on you just like this, but Watson here will tell you that I can never resist a touch of the dramatic. Holmes seized his hand and kissed it. God bless you, he cried. You've saved my honor. Well, my own was at stake, you know, said Holmes. I can assure you that just as hateful for me to fail in a case as it can be for you to blunder over commission. Phelps thrust away the precious document into the innermost pocket of his coat. I have not the heart to further interrupt your breakfast any further, and yet I am dying to know how you got it and where it was. Holmes swallowed a cup of coffee and turned his attention to the ham and eggs. Then he rose to me, lit his pipe, and settled himself down into his chair. I'll tell you what I did first, and how I came to do it afterwards, said he. After leaving at the station, I went for a charming walk through some admirable Surrey scenery to a pretty little cottage and village named Ripley, where I had my tea at an inn and took the precaution of filling my flask and putting a paper of sandwiches in my pocket. There I remained until evening, when I set off for walking again, and found myself in the high road outside Briarwood just after sunset. Well, I waited until the road was clear. It is never a very frequented one at any time, I fancy. And then I clambered over the fence into the ground. Surely the gate was open, ejaculated Phelps. Yes, but in a particular taste for these matters, I chose the place in the fence where 3 fir trees stand, and behind the scenes I got over without little chance of anyone in the house being able to see me. I crouched down among the bushes on the other side and crawled from one to the other. Witnesses the disreputable state of my trouser knees, until I had reached the clump of theatrons just opposite to your bedroom window. There I squatted down and awaited developments. The blind was down in your room, and I could see Miss Harrison sitting there reading by the table. It was 10:15 when she closed her book, fastened the shutters, and retired. I heard her shut the door, and felt quite sure that she had turned the key in the lock. The key! Ejaculated Phelps. Yes. I had given Miss Harrison instructions to lock the door on the outside and take the key with her when she went to bed. She carried out every one of my injunctions to the letter, and certainly, without her cooperation, you would not have that paper in your coat pocket. She departed, and the lights went out. Then I was left squatting in the rhododendron bush. The night was fine, but still it was a very weary vigil. Of course, it was the sort of excitement about it that the sportsman feels when he lies beside the watercourse and waits for big game. It was a very long, although almost as long, Watson, as when you and I waited that deadly room when we looked into the little problem of the speckled band. There was a church clock down at Woking which struck the quarters, and I thought that more than once it had stopped. At last, however, about 2 in the morning, I suddenly heard a gentle sound of a bolt being pushed back and the creaking of a key. A moment later, the servant's door was opened, and Mr. Joseph Harrison stepped out into the moonlight. "Joseph!" ejaculated Phelps. He was bareheaded, but he had a black cloak thrown over his shoulders so that he could conceal his face in an instant if there were any alarm. He walked on tiptoe under the shadows of the wall, and when he reached the window he worked a long-bladed knife through the sash and poked back the catch. I had a perfect view of the inside of the room and every one of his movements. He lit 2 candles, which stood just as is usually left to enable plumbers to get the points of the gas pipes. This one covered, as a matter of fact, the T-joint, which gives off the pipe which makes supplies in the kitchen underneath. Out of this hiding place he drew that little cylinder of paper, pushed down into the board, rearranged the carpet, blew out the candles, and walked straight into my arms as I stood waiting for him outside the window. Well, he has rather more viciousness than I gave him credit for, as Mr. Joseph. He flew at me with his knife, and I had to grasp him twice, and got a cut over the knuckles before I had the upper hand on him. He looked murder out only the eye could see when he had finished. But he listened to reason and gave up the papers. Having got them, I let my man go, but I wired full particulars to Forbes this morning. If he is quick enough to catch this bird, well and good. But if he, as I surely suspect, finds the nest empty before he gets there, why, all the better for the government. I fancy that Lord Holquist, for one, and Mr. Percy Phelps, for another, would very much rather that the affair never got as far as the police court. So it was. I And Joseph. Joseph a villain and a thief. I'm afraid Joseph's character is rather deeper and more dangerous than one might judge from his appearance. From what I have heard from him this morning, I gather that he has lost heavily in dabbling with stocks, and that he is ready to do anything on earth to better his fortunes. Being an absolutely selfish man, when a chance presents itself, to not allow either his sister's happiness or your reputation to hold his head. Percy Phillips sat back in his chair. My head whirls, said he. Your words have dazed me. The principal difficulty in your case, remarked Holmes in his didactic fashion, lay in the fact of there being too much evidence. What was vital was overlaid and hidden by what was irrelevant. All of the facts which I had already begun to suspect Joseph from the fact that you had intended to travel home with him that night, and that therefore it was a likely enough thing that he should call for you, knowing that for an office well upon his way. When I heard that someone had been so anxious to get into the bedroom, in which no one but Joseph could have concealed anything, upon which the nurse was absent, showing that the intruder was well acquainted with the ways of the house. How blind I have been! The facts in the case, as far as I have worked them, are these. When Mr. Joseph Harrison entered the office through the Charles Street door, knowing his way, he walked straight into your room the instant after you left it. Finding no one there, he promptly rang the bell, and the instant that he did so, his eyes caught the paper upon the table. A glance showed him that the chances put away his state's documents of immense value, and in an instant he had it thrust into his pocket and was gone. A few minutes elapsed, as you remember, before the sleepy commissioner drew your attention to the bell. And those were just enough. What he thought was a very safe place, with the intention of taking it out again in a day or two, and carrying it to the French embassy, or wherever he thought that a long price was to be had. Then came your sudden return. He, without a moment's warning, was bundled out of his room, and from that time onward there were always at least two of you there to prevent him from regaining the treasure. The situation to him must have been a sudden maddening one, but at last he thought he saw his chance. He tried to steal it, but was baffled by your wakefulness. You may remember that you did not take your usual draught that night. I remember. I fancied that he had taken steps to make the draught efficacious, and that he quite relied upon your being unconscious. Of course, I understood that he would repeat the attempt whenever it would be done in safety. Your leaving the room gave him chances he wanted. I kept Miss Harrison at all day so that he might not anticipate us. Then, having given him the idea that the coast was clear, I kept guard as I had described. I already knew that the papers were probably in the room, but I had no desire to rip up the planking and skirting in each of them. I let him take them, therefore, from the hiding place, and so saved an infinity of trouble. Is there any other point which I might make more clear? Why did he try the window on the first occasion? I asked, when he might have entered by the door. In reaching the door, he would have to past hopes that he had any murderous intention. The knife was only meant as a tool. It may be so, answered Holmes, shrugging his shoulders. I can only say for certain that Mr. Joseph Harrison is a gentleman whose mercy I should be extremely unwilling to trust. I'm a little concerned that my mic has been peeking out. Anyway, that was the second story. I only have one more story in this book. I have, however, ordered more books. Which is strange because I got several more Sherlock Holmes books for less than the price of the Sherlock Holmes game, which I would also like to play, but still. Anyway, thank everyone for listening and lurking. I wish I'd stumbled so many times on that, but that happened, and I was also trying to pay attention to my microphone because it did seem like it was cutting off a lot, and that was bothering me. Especially since I have a delay between when I say something and when it's actually played out to the stream. And I'm currently looking through the listing to see if anyone has a raid suggestion. I will take it without, making anyone spend any points. They do actually have one of the rewards that you can choose to raid. I think I turned that on. Twitch is acting up, so not letting me do anything. Oh, well, the page has become unresponsive. That's lovely. So we could go to another person reading. Page unresponsive. I hate that notice. Okay. That window's working. I wonder why this one isn't. But I do see some friends on right now. I know I've got another reader that's working on. She's reading 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Or we could fund someone else. I don't know. I think we'll read Folklore. She's been on for an hour. I don't want to read Dusk or do I want to read. Dusk is playing Elden Ring. Falcor is reading books. I'm not getting a listing of who was on. My page is frozen. Oh, come on. Anyway, got the bookstore, everything else taken care of. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and read Falcor if Twitch will allow me. Again, she's taking a slight pause in her reading, so it's always nice to go get other readers. So let's go ahead and read her. I've got my raid messages, if I can type them, because I'm having to reach for my camera. Got one for followers. Got one for subscribers. And button. That's Red Falcor. We'll see everyone later, and hopefully tomorrow when I go back to Fairy Tales, provided nothing happens again. I've been missing out on my Fairy Tales lately, which I apologize for. But anyway, I'll see you over in Falcors, and have a good evening, afternoon, whichever it may be for you. We'll see you over there if the raid starts. Or not, because it says that her settings don't let me to raid. Okay, well, raid dusk. Okay. We'll read Dustwalker since hers is actually working. Anyway, same message. See you all over there.